Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jennie Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
And we are super excited today that we have a guest with us. It's been a little while since we've had a guest. I think our last one was in December.
Yeah, it's been a
Yeah.
while.
It's been a while to have a guest on. So we're super excited to have somebody who knows more than we do about today's topic. And he's going to take us through sort of a brief overview of the Civil War. We won't get into all the fine details that led up to that particular issue in United States history, but I think for our listeners outside the US, it's probably a good idea to know kind of why we had to fight each other in the first place. And so I'm going to let Diane make these introductions because it was Diane who actually discovered this guest when she was looking for stuff on YouTube. So Diane?
Yeah. So I've always been fascinated by the Civil War and just that time period in history and Gettysburg. I do not know why I'm drawn to Gettysburg, but I am. And then when my son was out at Christmas, he's like, okay, when are we going to Washington, D.C.? And I'm like, well, we're going to Gettysburg, right? And so then it's like, then I started researching and watching YouTube videos that Tim does from the Adams County Historical Society, which I think when looking, your organization was the first one that actually started the preservation of the battlefield. And then in watching this, there's like a Colorado Springs connection, but I had no idea to the extent, first of all, the size of Gettysburg, the battlefield. It actually went through the town of Gettysburg. I mean, they were battling over fences and in yards, and there's so many stories, but just to the extent of what it is and all the monuments that are placed throughout the battlefield. And so I reached out to Tim, and it's like, please, please be on the podcast and share what you can. There's so much. So we may have Tim on, hopefully, several times. So with that rambling introduction, I would like to introduce to the podcast Tim Smith, are you the main tour guide at Gettysburg?
There's a lot of tour guides. There's about 150 licensed battlefield guides that give tours of the battlefield. And I've been a tour guide for over 30 years, but I'm not the main tour guide of the battlefield. I'm the main local historian. So
okay.
The battlefield of Gettysburg is in Adams County, Pennsylvania, and I'm the Adams County historian. So although I'm very knowledgeable in the battle, my focus and my main occupation is to the history of the people who lived here at the time of the battle.
Okay, so that's perfect, absolutely perfect, because it's something that, to me, it was so disconnected from a community, which is so far from the truth. So we'll just go ahead and turn it over to you, and you can tell us about Adams County Historical Society, Gettysburg, and just the battlefield itself.
Okay, well, basically, the Battle of Gettysburg is fought in the middle of the American Civil War, which lasted for about 4 years between 1861 and 1865. And Gettysburg is not the first battle of the war. It's not the last battle of the war. It's right in the middle of the war. So we consider it sort of the turning point of the war. And of course, it's a huge Northern victory during the war. And the one interesting thing is that the Battle of Gettysburg was fought in the North. So during the 4 years of the war, obviously the Northern United States at that time was fighting against the Southern United States. And a lot of the battles were fought in the South. But this was a battle that was fought in the North on Northern soil. And after the American Civil War, when the Northern veterans were commemorating and memorializing their service during the American Civil War, Gettysburg was easy to get to. It was in the North, and they first locals and then later veterans who fought in the battle purchased and memorialized this battlefield. And of course, since it was the bloodiest battle of the war and the turning point, it became the most memorialized battlefield in our country. And it's fascinating to come here and learn about the battle, but also to view just the thousands of monuments and markers and tablets that were placed here over the years by the veterans themselves and later the War Department and, the National Park Service.
And if for our viewers who are not with us on YouTube right now, Diane and I each have a picture of sections of the battlefield behind us that show some of these monuments and graves. It looks so beautiful and serene and peaceful. So to think that the bloodiest battle of the entire war was fought, where these monuments now stand is kind of crazy. How did Gettysburg get chosen as a site for the battle? I mean, this was a community where people were living and trying to, go about their everyday lives. And I know that in addition to the battle itself going on right there on the battlefield, it really affected the people of Gettysburg themselves because the war came to their front door.
Yeah, in the summer of 1863, Robert E. Lee decided to bring the war into the North. So the first 2 years of the war were pretty much fought on Southern soil with an occasional battle near and in Maryland. And here, Robert E. Lee's force of about 70 to 75,000 men marched north through Maryland into Pennsylvania. The Northern Army followed them from Virginia, and the battle could have been fought in a number of places, but Gettysburg was a concentration point, the center of 10 different major roads. And these roads sort of drew the armies together. And the battle was fought here because the roads happened to lead here. And it could have, like I said, could have happened somewhere else, but it just so happened here. And the battle escalated because of the road system into this major battle. And, we talk about different battles in American history and during the Civil War. We had about 50,000 casualties. That means 50,000 men were killed or wounded or captured or missing after the battle was over. It's really difficult for us to say exactly how many people died. People died during the battle. Their bodies were on the battlefield afterwards. People died in the hospitals around the town. There were maybe like 100 different places we would refer to as hospitals. People died the day after the battle, a week after the battle, a month after the battle. There were still hospitals in the Gettysburg area for 4 months afterwards.
Wow.
And then men were shipped to other cities like Harrisburg and Philadelphia and Baltimore. And men died in these general hospitals in these major cities as a result of their wounds from Gettysburg. So I generally say that if 5,000 men died in the battle, another 3,000 to 5,000, we would say, died as a result of the battle in these area and regional hospitals. So the death toll is about, could be as much as 10,000.
Right.
And after the battle, and, behind you in the image I see, there's the Soldiers' National Monument in the Soldiers' National Cemetery. And after the battle, there were dead everywhere. And the Northerners who were buried by the Northerners, the North retained possession of the battlefield after the fighting was over, and the South, who lost the battle, retreated. So after the battle, it was the Northern soldiers doing the burying on Northern soil.
Right.
And so they buried the Northern soldiers on the battlefield, wherever they fell, in individual graves. And the Southerners were simply buried in mass graves.
Interesting.
And starting 3 months after the battle, the Northerners were buried in our national cemetery, and which is behind you. And about 3,500 Northern soldiers are buried in a semicircular plot around what is now the Soldiers' National Monument, which was dedicated, the cornerstone, in 1865 and completed in 1869. So right away
Yeah.
after the battle, we had this memorial to the Northern soldiers, the Soldiers National Cemetery. Now, Southerners were not buried in our national cemetery. The Southerners were left out on the battlefield wherever they fell. And it wasn't until years later that ladies from the South, organizations pulled together money, came to Gettysburg, hired people, and recovered Southern soldiers from the battlefield. And those soldiers were then taken to Southern cemeteries like Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond. But pretty much the Southerners today that died at the battle are buried in unknown graves.
Wow.
I'm sure more than 90% of the Southerners killed in the battle are buried in unknown graves. The North, they tried to identify the bodies as best they could individually, and then they're buried in our national cemetery within state plots.
Wow. What a job to have to go through and identify each of those men and figure out, who to contact for their family. I mean, that's the days before dog tags existed. So it would have been quite the job to have to be the person or people doing that particular thing. So you said that in Gettysburg itself, there were several places that were turned into hospitals. And I know in a lot of cases, it was like anywhere that was available to bring in those soldiers and start treating them. So that could be the tavern, that could be somebody's house, that could be a lot of different places. Was there an official hospital there already, or was there something that had to be added later?
Yeah, there was no official hospital in Gettysburg at the time of the battle. We actually didn't have a hospital until, I believe, 1921.
Wow.
A city hospital. But there, a few weeks after the battle, they established a temporary field hospital. Camp Letterman General Hospital was established in the fields east of our town near our railroad tracks that were coming in. And it was named after Jonathan Letterman, who was the head surgeon in charge of the medical department of the Army at that time. And it was basically a large camp of tents. And there were some 500 tents to care for the wounded soldiers. And they did form a temporary cemetery at that camp where when people died, they were buried at. And those soldiers were then later reburied in the Soldiers National Cemetery. So I think it's important to note that all the soldiers are buried wherever they fall when they die, or wherever the nearest cemetery is if they die of their wounds. And then much later, their bodies were dug up and reburied in one of our, or in the soldier cemetery, or dug up and sent to their hometowns, or in the case of the Southerners, in bulk, transported to Southern cemeteries.
Now, since you are the Adams County historian, so you're, like you said at the beginning, you study the whole county, the people, the community. What are some of the stories that come out of the town itself that really drew your interest, that you found an interesting person or an event that took place around all of this that you'd like to share?
I do a lot of lectures on the different people that lived here and how they dealt with the battle. I have written several books, and one of my books is called John Burns, the Hero of Gettysburg, and it's about a local citizen who ran out on the battlefield. He was 69 years old, obtained a musket from the soldiers, and actually joined in the battle alongside the soldiers.
Wow.
Was wounded during the fighting. He was brought back into town. He survived his wounds. And after the battle, he spoke to some reporters about the fact that he went out and fought in the battle. When Matthew Brady, the famous photographer, arrived, Matthew Brady took his photograph. It appeared on the front cover of Harper's Weekly magazines as an engraving. And Abraham Lincoln saw it. So 4 months later, when Abraham Lincoln comes to give the Gettysburg Address, he wants to meet John Burns. And then dozens of reporters write about it. A guy in San Francisco named Bret Harte, who became a very famous poet, actually wrote a poem about him. N.C. Wyeth did an illustration of him. And this local citizen who really wasn't that famous or even notable in our town became somewhat of a national celebrity for running out and fighting in the battle. And my story is not just about what he did during the battle, but how he became famous and how fame affected him. Now, there are other people in our local community that gain notoriety from the battle. One of them is Jennie Wade. She was 20 years old and she was baking bread for the soldiers when a stray bullet went through the side door of the house and hit her in the back. And she was killed instantly. And she's the only civilian in the town to be killed during the actual fighting. So civilians died as a result of the fighting, because the disease and pestilence after the battle was horrible, and the water was polluted, and people died of disease. But to actually have someone who is in the line of fire and actually killed during the fighting is somewhat different. And so she has, her house is a tourist attraction. It was turned into a museum in 1904. And today it's the oldest continuously operational museum in Gettysburg. We can see the site where a 20-year-old girl was accidentally killed by a bullet in the battle. And, we have people who come here and they stay downtown. They learn about the battle and the battlefield and the soldiers, but the town is filled with buildings that were here during the battle that you can tour, or there are restaurants and you can eat in, and the buildings have bullet holes in them from the fighting. And so a lot of people are really interested in the town.
And that just shows you how close the fighting was to where the civilians were living and working at the time. If you've got the stray bullets flying through your house, not the funnest thing to have to try and survive.
So what is the size of the battle? What was the size of the battlefield then? And is it the same size today?
Well, the battle was fought over an area that's about 20 square miles. If I had to describe it, I would say the battle is a giant rectangle. It's about 4 miles across from west to east, and about 5 miles long from north to south. And Gettysburg, the town, is in the top middle of the rectangle. I would say the battle itself was fought on about 12,000 acres. And today, the Gettysburg National Military Park makes up about 6,000 of those 12,000 acres. Wow. So, for instance, there's heavy fighting in the town of Gettysburg, but the park doesn't own the town of Gettysburg. It's privately owned. So some of the areas where there are fighting are still, privately owned, but it's a pretty expansive park. And the national park consists of most of the major areas where there was heavy fighting, except the town.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it's grown over the years. One thing you mentioned in the beginning, and I should mention, is it was local people from the area that first preserved the battlefield. So in 1863, right after the battle, a local lawyer formed a committee called the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. And he raised some money and he purchased pieces of land. And in 1864, that organization was incorporated by the state of Pennsylvania. And from like 1863, 4 until like 1878, it was local people that purchased land and commemorated the area where the battle was fought. And by 1878, the Northern veterans took a huge interest in the battle, and they started to come to Gettysburg, have reunions, put up monuments to where the different units fought in the battle. In 1895, the federal government came in and the lands of the GBMA, we call it, Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association, were handed over to the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission, run by the War Department. So from 1895 until about 1933, the War Department controlled the battlefield, and a lot more monuments were placed. Roads were put in, improvements were made for visitation of the battlefield. And from 1933 until the present day, the National Park Service administers and cares for the park, which is interesting because, usually the National Park Service takes over a site and, is the first one to administer the site. But in our case, this battlefield had been around and administered by other groups prior to it becoming a national park. So I guess we were a national park before there were such things as national parks.
Well, I'm glad that the citizens of Gettysburg decided to make sure that this was commemorated and remembered, and that it wasn't just forgotten. It could have been something where they could have buried the dead, kind of moved on with it. And it's happened in other areas where battles were fought, but this was one that, as bloody and as big of a battle as this was, the citizens themselves says, nope, we're not going to let this be forgotten. We're going to make sure that the men that fought here and died here and survived here, because there were survivors, could have a place to come back to remember the men that died. So.
Yeah, and one thing I should say about that is that first of all, a lot of these sites early on in the history of monumentation of the Civil War, a lot of these sites and monuments initially were to mark the spot where people died, and that's common. Like
right.
Somebody fell here, and you put up a marker to mark where they fell. Or even today, when somebody has a car accident, somebody goes out and puts something next to the road and says, so-and-so died here. But as time went on, the veterans that survived the battle saw what was going on here. And they started to put up monuments, not to honor just the dead, but to honor the men that survived and mark the spot where they fought in the battle. Right. And then the second thing I should mention about what you said is, and I'm sure other people would point this out, they would be immediately telling you that, well, maybe the local people were not as much interested in preserving the memory of this great historical event as they were as to turning this area into a tourist attraction, which then large amounts of people would be coming to, and that the local people could make an income from. So there's no doubt about it. After the American Civil War, our local town and county infrastructure is changed from one of agriculture and, perhaps before the war, carriage making, into a full-blown tourist economy where we have hotels and we have restaurants, and local people are carriage drivers and tour guides, and we have railroads bringing thousands of people in during the summer, and we can give them tours of the battlefield. And part of the purpose is to make the battlefield look as attractive as possible so that we can take these tourists around, and people are really responded to to Gettysburg for many reasons. Some people came here because they wanted to learn about the battle and wanted to experience where, all these men, fought. And Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address 4 months after the battle. They want to see the spot where he gave the address. And then the veterans want to come to learn about, the other units that were in the battle and maybe highlight their role in the 4 years of the American Civil War.
Well, I could see too that since this was the only battle fought on Northern soil, that was a way for them, the Northern people, to have a piece of something, since everything was fought in the South. And, you know, they definitely had no connection to the South or would even go to the South to step foot onto those battlefields. But then in one of your videos on YouTube, you talked about, and this sort of just blew my mind, about the trolley that used to run through Gettysburg it was what, from 1890
93.
to 1916. So right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So
So
why did
yeah,
they take that out?
yeah. I mean, I think when you look at commercialism, and my take on it is, growing up, I'm from Baltimore, but I've had in the 1970s, my family moved up here pretty close, and from that point on, I've had pretty, constant interaction with the Gettysburg commercialization. And I think most people think commercialization, maybe out of control commercialization, is something more modern. That, oh, they respected these things years ago, and it was only
Right.
recently that we started doing these ridiculous things. No, no. There have been commercialism right away. There's always been commercialization. And it's really difficult for me being here to like qualify the different commercialization. Oh, this was good commercialization. Oh, this was bad commercialization. It's really difficult for me. For instance, I think sometimes people are quick to like, say, oh, commercialization is bad. So, I'm a tour guide, and my profession basically came out of people charging other people money to give them a tour of the battlefield. So we're kind of making money
Right.
on the deaths of these men. Now, I like to think it's an honorable profession, and we're educating the public about the American Civil War. And, we talk to them on our tours about myriad of topics, memorialization, and the history of the war and the causes of the war. And as we go on, we get a chance to talk to people and provide some entertainment. But I can look back, and before there were licensed battlefield guides, there were unlicensed battlefield guides. And maybe there were guys in wagons just at the train station, and you'd come into their wagon and you'd pay them a couple dollars, and they would take you to the round top and just tell you story after story that they made up. So, and then, but the commercialization, like the people from the outside saw the opportunity that the Gettysburg battlefield provided. So outside companies, such as businessmen from maybe Philadelphia or Baltimore or New York, took advantage of this and built hotels. There's a great early commercialization project where the Gettysburg Springs Hotel, and basically they built a huge hotel out on the first day's battlefield. It opened for business in 1869, 6 years after the battle, and it was investors from outside. And they not only did they have an expensive hotel you could stay at right on the battlefield, but also there was a spring house. And the story was that after the battle, soldiers crawled over to this spring to wash off their wounds and noticed the water had medicinal qualities, and that it would heal whatever ailed you. And so they started selling the water, and and you could come to the medicinal spring and you pay money and you could take a bath in the bathhouse. And it was just really, really a little out of control. And then, of course, we have things like on the battlefield today, we have horseback tours. We have a double-decker tour bus tour. We have these things called scoot coops. You ride around little like bumper cars on the battlefield.
Oh.
We have Segway tours. We have ghost tours. Some of it, it's hard to get your mind around how commercialistic it is. It's always been like that. It's not like something new.
Right.
Yeah, because the one I watched last night, and I think it was the second I watched, the one on Mr. Fuller, there was a gentleman by the name of Weibel that had a dance hall and all this other stuff. And it's like, and I'm like, well, I guess I could see it for the veterans who are wanting to come out and pay their respect. But yeah, I had no idea how commercialized it is, which I guess helps maintain the park though, right? The memorial.
Yeah. Well, we've always had a battle in our area between the forces of preservation and the forces of commercialization and where the line should be within that. But I think what happened, one of the reasons the park had to expand and had to go, the War Department stepped in and the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association handed their land over to the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission, was the fact that land that was outside the park boundary was being developed into commercial entities right next to the battlefield. There were several amusement parks. There was an amusement park on the backside of Little Round Top from 1884 until the early 1900s. There was an amusement park at Devil's Den. Devil's Den was privately owned for many years. And Weibel's Woods, you're talking about, was in existence for a few years. So where people could, they took advantage of this visitation to bring them to an amusement park. And, people are here, they're learning about history. Maybe they can only learn about history for so long before they need to go to a saloon and get a drink and go to the dance hall.
I guess.
Well, and I think a lot of historical communities, I mean, the ones that people visit today, I think have run into a lot of those problems, those same problems. Yeah. You've got the people that really want to share and preserve the history, and then you have the people who want to make the money. And at the same time, it's not bad to bring the money into the community because times change and how we make money and earn money is fine. And you need the money also to upkeep the historical side of things. So it's always a double-edged sword when it comes to the commercialism of the historical sites plus keeping the integrity of the site itself.
Now, I know you guys are cemetery people, and I, for many years, was the president of Evergreen Cemetery. So Evergreen Cemetery is the local cemetery that is behind you on the other side of the trees, right next to the National Cemetery. And
so is that Cemetery Ridge, or is that
that's why it's called Cemetery Ridge.
Okay, because that's what I was going to ask you, because it mentioned, because the cemetery was definitely there before the battle, correct? So
there is a cemetery there prior to the battle, but the soldier cemetery is after the battle.
Right.
But the soldier cemetery is on Cemetery Hill because there was another cemetery there prior to the battle.
Sense to expand it out and,
Yeah, so they're side by side. But that cemetery is going to fill up one day. And other historic cemeteries have this issue or problem where how do you maintain a cemetery that is full? Yep. Well, you give tours of that cemetery, and so if you go to other historic places, like you guys have probably been to some of the cemeteries in Boston, they charge you money to go into them and you give tours. Of course, they're very quick to go into the ghost stuff when you go into cemeteries. We don't have that in our cemetery, but how much do we allow tourists in our cemetery? And, the plots are purchased by local families so that they can go there and honor their dead or their relatives or respect the dead. And, so there's always that commercial thing involved in the issue of cemeteries.
Yeah, the being respectful, but still maintaining it. And cemeteries are expensive to maintain. There's no way around it. It costs a lot of money to keep them up. So,
So what are, and then when I was looking at stuff before our call about Gettysburg, there is that one, I think it's a pretty cool, famous picture. And I'm going to say it was in the 1930s where there was a reunion and there was the Northern, and they did this reenactment that some of the Northern soldiers met some of the Southern soldiers over a wall. And they did that handshake. And then also, if you could tell us the nightmare story. 'Cause
Okay.
I just love that story. I don't know why,
Yeah.
but I do.
So, in the photograph where, not the cemetery, the other photograph that is behind you, we are looking south from what we call the high water mark, towards Little and Big Round Top in the distance. And on your right, Diane's right, well, it would be Diane's left, but look at the photograph on the right. That's the stone wall that was along Cemetery Ridge, and out in front of where you're looking in that image, that's where that famous photograph of the men shaking hands across the wall occurred.
Oh, cool.
So on the third day of the battle, we had pickets charged. The first day of the battle, the South won. They captured the town of Gettysburg. There was heavy fighting in the streets. The South won that battle. The Northern Army fell back to Cemetery Hill. On the second day of the battle, pretty much the South attacked both ends of the Northern line. So we had fighting at Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill and along Cemetery Ridge. On the third day, the South made an all-out assault against the Union center. And that's what we call Pickett's charge. And although there's lots of different aspects of the battle we talk about, Pickett's charge is one of the more notable things that occurred during the fighting. And it's probably one of the more famous charges in American military history. But basically, about 12,000 men crossed an open field under cannon fire and tried to break through a strongly defended position. It was a total failure. So in years after the Civil War, there were reunions. And at first, Gettysburg is pretty much dominated by Northern veterans putting up monuments. But then there's also some reunions where they bring some Southern veterans in to interact with the Northern veterans. And it was a huge reunion, in 1913. And then again, there was a huge reunion in 1938. And that hands across the wall image you see of the Union and Confederate soldiers shaking hands. It's kind of the last reunion of the blue and gray. And this was at the 75th anniversary of the battle. So imagine if the soldiers, are like 20, the average age of soldiers at this reunion was like 94. And yet 2,000 veterans of the American Civil War were brought back to Gettysburg. The federal government paid the expenses of veterans who wanted to attend the ceremonies. And they dedicated a memorial on the first day's battlefield, the Eternal Light Peace Memorial that you guys could look up. And they had this huge veterans reunion. And people loved it. And at this time, there was a desire for the reunification of the country. It really happened more in the 1913 reunion, but as time went by, people wanted to, feel like the Northern and Southern soldiers were reuniting and our country was not so separated or segregated. Now, there's many books written on this topic about how, maybe that concept is promoted more than it actually should have been, or whether that concept of the North and the South being totally reunited is true or not. But the press really loved things like that. Now, I'd encourage you. Diane mentioned it. The photograph. If you get on YouTube, there's actually a video of that clip.
Oh, cool.
So not only is it a photograph, you can see a video. And one of my favorite parts is they're shaking hands, and this Southern soldier, a couple soldiers away, starts yelling. And
the rebel yell.
Yeah, and supposedly he's doing a rebel yell. And one he's doing a rebel yell. And I don't know what I thought the rebel yell is, but that wasn't it. I'd encourage you can find that actual clip of the 1938 reunion and look at it. So that's something else we talk about on our tours. And again, Gettysburg is a place where not only was it the site of the bloodiest battle in American history, it is the best memorialized battlefield in American history, where people have come back to time and time again, and tried to memorialize what happened here, or to commemorate what happened here, or to use the battlefield as a place to draw people's attention to whatever point they're trying to draw people's attention to.
Right.
So, it's fascinating in that respect.
Yeah, because that's what I like so much about your videos in your series of videos on YouTube, is you go into a lot of the personal stories, and these are just the ones I have watched. It really didn't go into all the specifics about the battle. It was the people who were involved.
And so to tell your story you wanted me to tell. So
Yeah.
I'll do a little plug for my YouTube channel. It's through the Adams County Historical Society here in Gettysburg, but we do a thing called Monuments Monday, where I go out and film, and every Monday we have a theoretically short, sometimes I get out of control, video on just a topic, and I try to take a monument, and then I usually do something that only we can do, is maybe tie in some local newspaper account to the monument. And then I try to attach a human interest story with the monument also. And what the monument you're talking about, I was talking about the 7th Indiana Infantry. And this unit was about 400 men, and they had missed the first day of the battle because they were guarding a wagon train. But they arrived on the evening of the first day and rallied with the rest of the 1st Army Corps on Culp's Hill. And the Iron Brigade, which they were positioned next to, had lost a serious amount of men. They lost like 1,000 men in the first fighting, killed or wounded or captured in the street fighting or missing. So they just didn't know what happened to these guys. And they're sitting down to rest. They're building some entrenchments. The men are really upset about all their comrades. And one thing about the Civil War is the units are all from the same towns, so they're brothers and uncles and cousins all fighting together. And finally, around midnight, everybody calms down, and everybody's laying down, and everybody's resting from a long, long day in which a lot of people lost their best friends. And a guy in the 7th Indiana, and this unit was not even in the first day's battle, woke up in the middle of the night, had a nightmare, and was screaming and yelling. And everyone around him, and up and down the line, there could have been 1,000 people around him that heard this, just jumped up. The Union soldiers grabbed their muskets, ran over to the entrenchments they built, and fired volley after volley after volley down through the woods into nothing. And it took a while for them to sort out this confusion that occurred. And I just, we have like 4 accounts of it that are left behind by people who were there and witnessed it. And, he was shocked by it, but you can imagine the strain that was on these men.
Oh, yeah.
Going through something like that and losing all their comrades and just totally losing it like they did.
Well, and they would have come upon, by the time the Indiana infantry got there, they would have come upon the ravages of the day. Like that's what they would have viewed by the time they got there. They didn't see it in action, but they saw the remnants of what had been happening all day before they could get there. So, and I'm sure, I mean, whatever his nightmare was about, it could have been any of the battles he'd fought in, any of the other horrors of the war that, had seen, and it just hit him that hard that night. But how scary. It's almost a good thing they didn't accidentally shoot each other in that situation, because I could see where that could happen.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, and I shouldn't say funny, but it's interesting in the Civil War that we don't talk about friendly fire.
Right.
You're killed, you just die. But I can just tell you there's lots of incidents of friendly fire in the Civil War, where they, especially with artillery, you probably don't want to fire cannons over the heads of your own soldiers in the Civil War. The fuses are not very good. Sometimes they prematurely explode.
Yikes.
Sometimes the elevation screw on the cannon is a little lower than you'd like, and you accidentally kill soldiers in front of you instead of hitting the enemy. And this happens time and time again. So in the Civil War, there is a good chance of dying by friendly fire, a little more than you might expect.
Well,
But
we didn't take into consideration PTSD that soldiers suffer until just, I don't say recently, but at least since Vietnam. Then we can go back and look. But because Jenny and I have talked several times about the Civil War, and so many Civil War veterans, both North and South, came to Colorado and settled in Colorado because there was so much going on for us here at the time, and just trying to imagine what these men suffered through and how, but you just don't hear about that much.
Yeah. And, I should mention it. For 30 years, I did school bus tours on the battlefield. And so the other thing is, what we try to do when people come to Gettysburg is we try to get them to understand that the people who fought here were just like them, or that they have some connection to the people that fought here. Because I think in history, it's easy to think of an event like the Battle of Gettysburg, and it's like a far away event that you're detached from and have no connection to. And so whenever a school bus comes, and I had a bunch of school groups that used to come from Colorado. And one of them, let's see, I think one of them is Broomfield Middle School.
Okay, yeah.
That's
Not far from me.
Yeah.
And of course, there we would stop by the Eisenhower farm and point out Mamie Eisenhower.
Uh-huh.
Dwight David Eisenhower had moved to Gettysburg, he and Mamie, in 1950, after he was the Supreme Allied Commander, and he lived here. This was his home while he was president. And of course, Mamie's born in Iowa, and then her father, when she was about 8, I believe, moved to Colorado. They lived in Pueblo, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Colorado for a time. And then they moved and they lived in Colorado Springs for a time. And then they moved in Broomfield. And that's where she kind of grew up. So we try to, however we can do it, we try to tie in the place that people are from the area that, they're from. And that, like you mentioned, when you watch one of my videos, I was talking about a soldier that was born in Maine, had fought in the 2nd Wisconsin in the Battle of Gettysburg, survived, lost his leg in the Battle of the Wilderness, and then afterwards moved to Colorado Springs and became a physician in Colorado Springs, and then ended up moving to Michigan and dying in Michigan. So, yes, I'd say Colorado is a place that's filled with soldiers who maybe some of them are trying to get away from the memories of these horrible events that occurred here afterwards, and, finding a new place to settle, a new place to live. California. I was looking at we talked about the 1938 reunion, and 2,000 veterans of the Civil War attended. I think California sent more veterans to the Gettysburg reunion in 1938 than any other state.
Wow.
North and South,
Well, and you have to think, I know for Colorado history, California is probably very similar in this. I mean, there were a lot of men that had come out here prior to the war because of the gold and the silver, and they were mining all of that. And then the war broke out, and a lot of them went back to fight on both sides. That's the thing. Like Colorado, we have both sides, because we had men that came from the South and we had men that came from the North looking for gold. And then, of course, when the war broke out, they went back to fight for, the side that they believed in. And, but then if they did survive, a lot of them did come back this way or went to California or Wyoming or Utah or Arizona or all the, Montana, all the different places where gold was being discovered, and they kind of traveled around to try and make their riches. It's just, in my mind, from a historical point, when you think about, they fought through the Civil War, they survived the war. And then they went and did all this gold hunting, which was not an easy life. Like, these men did not have easy lives at all. But they persevered through it all. They just kept going, and they were like, we're just we're going to move on to the next thing, and we're going to make life happen. And they did. It's one of my favorite things when I think about that from a historical context.
And that's the point I guess I'm making, is that sure, people fought at Gettysburg and the battle was fought in Gettysburg, and we study Gettysburg, but the people who fought here were from all over the place and then settled the Western United States. And it's interesting to me when I see little towns that in the West that are named after people who were prominent in the Battle of Gettysburg or settled by people who were in the Battle of Gettysburg. Like there's a Gettysburg, South Dakota.
Yep.
I'm sure, named after the Battle of Gettysburg. So it's fascinating.
Well, it makes you wonder when they picked the name, what they were thinking. Like, was it because they're honoring the battle, or they're honoring men from the battle, or was it something else that led them to decide that we want to name our town after the place of the bloodiest battle of the war? It's nice that people wanted to have it, but yes. Well, Tim,
thank you.
are so glad that you came on. We would love to have you on again. One of the things I'm sure you heard at the beginning, our catchphrase is kind of, every death had a life and every life had a story. And it really is our goal with the podcast for most things to share the stories of the people, to remake those connections again, so that history becomes more than just a series of dates and locations, and it becomes the people that created whatever or did whatever. My favorite thing, and it's gotten harder to do as we've done more with the podcast, but is to actually research grave sites where they're not famous, that they weren't well known, except maybe in their own communities. Maybe they had something to do with their communities. But sometimes it's just sharing how somebody lived, the lifestyle that some people would live at that time. This is what was going on in the life for themselves in their own homes and the homes around them, and what was going on nationally and internationally. Sometimes I think there's a disconnect from all of that. So I like that what you do, especially as the historian for your entire county, is that you make those connections again, and you tell people that it's more than just a date in history, a few days of fighting and then we were done with it. This affected people forever since then in lots of different ways, either because they were directly involved with the battle, or they cared for the soldiers or whatever afterwards, or they were making money off of it, later in life, when they realized that this would be a hot spot for tourists. So thank you for preserving those stories and bringing back the humanity to history, because I think that's why some people get turned off by history. They forget that it involves people.
And if anybody finds themselves in Gettysburg, the Adams County Historical Society has a museum, and it's called Gettysburg Beyond the Battle. And that's kind of our mission, to talk about the battle, but also talk about the things that people experienced before and after the battle. And so if you come to our museum, we have a lot of displays about that, including the commercialization. And our museum was voted the #1 new museum in the country by USA.
Oh, nice.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Congratulations.
last year. We've been open for almost a year, our new museum.
Well, we will definitely make sure we have links to your museum and everything in our show notes, so that listeners, if you're traveling to Gettysburg, you are on our bucket list. I haven't been to Gettysburg yet, but my son, who's a huge Civil War buff, it's on his list of places to visit. So eventually we will get there.
You just might have to make a road trip.
What was that?
You might just have to make it.
I know. I think we need to make our own trip out there. The podcast needs to come to Gettysburg. Yep. It's something I've always wanted to do anyway, just being the history buff that I am, going to any historical society is like my favorite thing to do. So I can't be disappointed. But Tim, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to day to record with us, to share these stories. And listeners, make sure you check our show notes. We will have links to the museum, links to the Historical Society's YouTube channel, so you can watch all of Tim's stories that he's been sharing on there, and learn so much more about Gettysburg and beyond.
The YouTube channel is amazing. It really is amazing. So you do a wonderful job.
Well, thank you.
We thank you for taking time to join us today for these ordinary, extraordinary stories. To learn more about the stories we shared, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find the resources we use to research this episode.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X, formerly Twitter, at OrdExtraSim. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or our website. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
Until we meet again.